Hello and welcome to D.O.P.E Conversations. I am so excited to bring you this first episode of this wonderful show that we have planned for you today. We're going to talk about Black educators and the challenges they face, but also give you some solutions that you can use in your community. Today I have the honor of having Maya. She's a current student at KPVU, and she's in education and a future leader. And then we also have Mrs. Holmes, who is in leadership, and she's also had teacher experience, and we're glad to have her here today because she's going to share what it is to be a leader currently in a school district. And then our very own from KPVU, Dr. Thomas, and she's going to share with us today the inequalities that we see in the classroom and give us also some solutions that we can do so that we can succeed as Black educators in the districts that we work in. Thank you, ladies, for coming.
Thank you for having us.
So I am just going to jump right in. Today we're going to talk about what it is to be a Black educator, but I want to take us back a couple of weeks ago where we all were probably watching the news, and we saw on KHOU 11 that Cy-Fair ISD school board member Scott Henry made some unfavorable comments about Black educators. He made the comment, I want to make sure I quote him correctly. He critiqued Black teachers and suggested that more Black teachers as in a district shows that a greater rate of low graduation rates and dropout rates. So the more Black teachers you have in a district, the less chance that you have of having great graduation rates. First, I want to say, I know I felt some type of way about this. Cher, how did you feel about that when you heard this?
That triggered me because when he said it, I took it personally, being a former K-12 educator. He was judging without actually looking at the facts, without talking to actual teachers. He made a generalization. Generalizations are not good. Also, it concerned me because right now in education, we're dealing with a lot of battles on our hands.
Yes.
And he brought to light one battle that we are now currently facing, where we're looking at a shortage of Black teachers in education.
Right.
Right now, we make up about 7% of the entire workforce.
Wow.
And that statement is counterproductive towards what we're trying to do here at Prairie View, and also what educator preparation programs are trying to do across the country when we're trying to bring in more Black educators and prepare more, and also to bring in more Black male educators.
Yes, most definitely, exactly. Ms. Holmes, how did you feel about that?
For me, it wasn't as surprising as you may think it should be, but it was definitely heartbreaking knowing that I have a husband who works in that district, that's a Black male educator, and to know how he feels working in that district, and one of your board members makes that statement in reference to you because you are part of that 13%.
Right.
And so surprisingly, I wasn't surprised, but I was very hurt by it, knowing that represents my husband and then the many other Black educators in that district. So
exactly. And my future educator, my future leader, Ms. Maya.
It's discouraging, hearing a board member say that because you're doing all this background work to get started, and to have someone say that, it kind of stops you in your tracks, and you have to reevaluate what districts you want to go to.
That's a great point. I think when you see that you're not valued in certain districts, it may be a signal that, hey, you know what, I may need to start looking around for districts that accept me for who I am and see value in what I bring. One of the things, I was triggered as well, and then I remembered being in the classroom. I don't know about y'all, but they tend to put the most active kids in our classrooms.
Yes.
So to say that we don't have value and put out there that we hurt the school, I found that very hard to believe. And I was like, where's your data? I want to see you. Show me that. So with that, Dr. Thompson, I want to look at your research, and I know you study the inequalities in the classroom as far as literacy, and you're looking at education, and I want to know, what do you see, or have you experienced inequalities in the classroom, and what did it look like?
The primary inequality that I saw personally, because there are many, was in academic performance. And what I noticed and what I experienced, what led me to start studying, was that what was being promoted in a school district per se was a one-size-fits-all reading program or core program. And although they may have had a few modifications and accommodations here and there that were supposed to target students that were not going to understand the general lesson or the main lesson, it still did not address all of our students. And what I noticed is that a lot of the students that I had struggling were black males. And it was also in early literacy. So I started studying that, and I started taking notice as to what was working for them so they would no longer be marginalized, and then what wasn't working. So I actually had the pleasure, before I left the classroom, of having a group that was majority black males. And in this specific classroom, I was what they call blocked or departmentalized, where they only received English language arts and reading from me. These boys were as young as 7, 8, 9 years old. And they thrived in that classroom environment as opposed to the traditional classroom we think about, where they're with one teacher all day long for all of their subjects. Because my classroom was specifically designed for English language arts and reading. So there was less risk of them being distracted by what was on the walls according to subjects. I had strategies and I had activities there where if they needed references and resources, if they started to struggle on their own, they could grow independently into reading by just looking at what was there, what was in front of them. So it helped compartmentalize what they needed to close those reading performance gaps. And that led me into further studies of, is there a race equity issue even before they get to school? And so I actually had the opportunity this year to partner with a nonprofit named Children at Risk. And we collaborated along with 2 other researchers to start digging into where the race equality exists, or if it exists at all, and does it start here?
And so where was that gleam at? Where did you see the most shine, like, okay, this is an area that we need to address?
What we targeted were the resources, because we noticed that in schools that are predominantly, at least in K-12 schools later on, when it's predominantly black and Hispanic, there's inequity in resources. So we wanted to see was there a race equity issue even in the child care centers, which is where a lot of the foundations are laid now before they even enter kindergarten. And what we noticed is that we could not definitely determine at this time that it was race equity. It was more so of a resource inequity issue. We're going to further that research and continue it to dig a little bit deeper to determine if the resources that are available even from the state, if they are selectively being made available according to a child care center's background, the background of the owner, the background of the director, the background of the students.
So the research is showing not so much the educator, the black educator, but the lack of resources, the lack of equity in resources that you find from one school district or one school, because it could be one school district. I know Mrs. Holmes and I had talked about, you could be in the same school district and have totally different schools, because you know you have Title I, and then you have those that aren't Title I that have way more resources. So Mrs. Holmes, when you think about what Dr. Thomas has shared with us, how does that impact you as a black educator? Does that make you feel like, well, they're putting the blame on the educator and not really the problem, or how do you feel about that?
I totally agree with, especially when you talk about resources and what's available to students, what's available to certain students. You know, there are laws that are in place where a certain demographic of students have to receive some certain resources, certain interventions, certain plans to ensure that they're successful when for other race there's not, right? And so you definitely see that in resources. And so as an administrator, it's like, okay, is it really the Black educator that is playing this part, or is it the resources? Is it the system that we are working in as far as educational system that has a major impact on how successful our students are? So, you know, so that's a great question, because a lot of times we think it's the individual who's presenting the lessons, but could it actually be what they're presenting?
Exactly. I know, Maya, you're currently in the classroom gaining some experience substituting at a campus. What have you seen as a new educator? What are some things that you were shocked at? Because sometimes when you enter a new industry, you have an idea of what it would be like, and then when you're into it, you're like, oh, wait a minute, it's not that at all.
Well, to start with the resources, like physical resources, just the students, there not being enough colored pencils at, you know, the school that I'm at. The kids share maybe one box of 10 for like 6 students. And when I asked for more, they told me that they didn't have any, that they had to share them. And the colored pencils are down to, you know, the last little bit.
Yeah.
So me as, you know, a future educator, I went and I invested in colored pencils and pencils, just pencils in general, sharpeners. And I carry my, you know, I carry my work bag, I carry my supply bag, and when the kids need something, here you go, because they just don't have it. And I don't mind, you know, doing that out of my pocket.
And I safely can assume that all 3 of us have been in that situation where you're buying supplies for the classroom so that you can do your job.
It's to the point now to when I teach my classes, I will even stop and tell my students, here are the places where you can go to get inexpensive supplies.
Right.
If you have students that come with nothing in hand, or if you're in a school where the resources aren't readily available, here are some places you can go so that you don't go broke. And I even talk to them about who to talk to on campus to help assist with some of that resource supply.
Exactly. That's a good idea. So we've identified, you know, one of the many problems is resources, and that can be a humongous umbrella covering anything from things inside the classroom, also resources of having a sub, things that we're seeing right now, even bus drivers, the lack of bus drivers, not having adequate supplies is just one tip of the iceberg that we have to see in the classroom. But to give our Black educators some hope, what is it that they can do to kind of minimize that, to make their job a little better, but also put them in a position where they can strive to be an administrator one day, where they can have a long career in education and know that they're doing the best that they can do? What would you give, what advice would you give Maya? What advice would you give her?
If I were speaking, I'm speaking to Maya, but if I was speaking to a room full of Mayas that were on the brink of entering education, because I always tell them teaching is a service. You're called to teach.
Yeah.
To first of all, to have a sense of self-awareness. Sometimes we go into something brand new and we're open, and then we start receiving everything that comes from every direction, good, bad, and indifferent. So a sense of self-awareness. Secondly, I would also say that you need to know your information, know your content, know what you're going to teach.
Right.
You can have the most beautiful classroom on campus and have nothing going on.
Right.
So going in and knowing what you're supposed to teach, where they're supposed to be, so you can, because the main reason you're there is to help your students. Yeah. And you can have the gorgeous classroom, but also have that as well. And if you want to try to ward off or help prevent some Black fatigue, which may come from being a Black educator, which we've heard from the comment by the trustee, catching that, and then having to deal with students, because the way that we deal with students may not be the same as the way that our counterparts that are from a different cultural background may deal with them. We carry a lot of that, and that's innate, and that's just a part of our culture. To know how to set those healthy boundaries so that when you are trying to help them and love on them, it's not at the expense of yourself.
Yes, very good. Self-care. That's what I'm hearing from what you're saying, in addition to finding and knowing your content, definitely. Mrs. Holmes, as an administrator, what would you give the Mayas of the world?
I would definitely tell you to hold on to your why. There's going to be a lot of things that are going to come and play as you're in the classroom providing that education to our students. And so you have to hold on to your why. Why are you here? What is your purpose? The distraction from administrators giving you task after task after task, and then your students not being successful. So I would tell anyone, just hold on to your why. Why are you there?
Thank you. We need to take a commercial break. This conversation is really good. We're going to keep coming back. We're going to come back and talk to Maya and see if she has any questions about other things that she can do. And then we'll close out by giving you some great strategies to take with you. So thank you. Come back. Stay tuned. Welcome back. We paused the conversation so you didn't miss this good stuff that we're talking about. Maya, as a new educator and about to become a new educator, rather, do you have any questions that you're concerned about? What are you going to do when you get in certain scenarios?
Yes, ma'am. I have a question about, behavior. How do I thwart behavior in the beginning? I've set up my expectations, but how do I address that correctly from an administrator standpoint and then, like a mentoring teacher standpoint?
Good question. I think that's a question we've all had to deal with, and quite often you'll find on your campus, it seems the black educator is the most disciplined educator in the building. So, Mrs. Holmes, what do you say?
I'm going to say, and this is why I believe that we are the most disciplined. This is why I believe that they put them all in our classrooms when we're in that environment, is because we have a relationship. We develop a relationship with our students, and a lot of times you kind of find them like they're your own, and so you go that extra mile. When a student catches an attitude, it doesn't bother you. You continue to go on, you redirect. And so starting off new, I would say develop those relationships. Students are going to do whatever you want them to do. As long as they know that you trust them, that you're there for them, that you're going to respect them, they're going to do whatever you ask them to do. You know, so definitely develop those relationships at the beginning and not go in the first day talking about, here's your curriculum.
Right.
Here's the curriculum.
Right.
Let me teach you what you're going to learn. Okay, let's go on. So then now they have the feeling of, okay, this person don't even care about me. So getting to know them and developing those relationships would help deter some, I'm not going to say all, just being honest, some of the behaviors that you may see in your classrooms.
And just like anybody on a job, same thing in the classroom, they work for people they like. And if your students genuinely like you because you're loving on them but have their best interests and really trying to teach them, they're going to work for you. Dr. Thomas.
I'd like to piggyback off of what Mrs. Holmes said. Relationships are a cornerstone of having that environment, but also having a culturally inclusive environment in your classroom, because we don't know what their home lives are day one.
Right.
So you have to have a welcoming and an inviting classroom that will make them enjoy coming in there, because for some of your students, that's going to be their safe space.
Yeah.
Especially when they leave. And like Mrs. Holmes said, you're going to have some where that may not be the answer for them, but they'll still respect what you're wanting from them and what you're expecting from them. So in addition to building that relationship, creating that classroom environment that is culturally competent, culturally inclusive, but also when you're dealing with them on a day-to-day basis, also understanding your own cultural norms, the inflections in your voice when you talk to them. To them, it'll be very endearing, but to also be aware of what is expected from your administrators, what is the culture and the climate in the school regarding how you speak to students, how you treat students, how you handle students, so that you know that what they expect and then what you build in your classroom is in alignment.
Exactly. And I think one thing, just going back to the quote from Mr. Henry, as a Black educator, know your worth and know that this is a profession that you can have for long term. And I would say don't get discouraged by his comments. And I think it's very important to acknowledge his comment, because Dr. Thomas said something off camera that he believes that. But unfortunately, he's not the only one that believes that. So you have to act accordingly, and that means make sure that you are prepared, and make sure, just like my mom used to say, cross your eye, or dot your I and cross your T's. And with that, one of the solutions that I want to bring to the new educators is join a union. The union is not a bad word. Join a union and get involved. I think it's very important to get involved in unions because you know your rights. When you know your rights, it's hard for somebody like a Mr. Henry to come in and tell you your value, because you know where you can operate and how you can operate within that school district. Talk to your administrators, know your campus, like Dr. Thomas said. Those things are important. The union is there to help educators, not hurt educators. So I wanted to say that. But I also wanted to end our show by closing out with a quote from Ida B. Wells. I love Ida B. Wells. And so my guests, my audience, you will hear a lot about Ida B. Wells and W.E.B. Du Bois, so get ready. But she says, the way to right wrongs is to turn the light upon them. So you can't right wrongs if nobody knows about them. The things that Black educators are going through, we have to be more vocal about it. We have to have conversations like this, and we have to do it at the local level as well. Voting at the local level is important, because he got onto the school board because we voted him on there.
That's true.
And so we have to be able to make sure that we are very aware in who we're putting into these positions. So I want to thank you again, Maya. I want to thank you, Mrs. Holmes, and I thank you, Dr. Thomas, for sharing. And hopefully we helped somebody today. It's just conversations like this, small conversations like this, that get things started. And so I thank you for coming on. Is there any research that you want to share with us that you're working on now, or anything that you have coming up?
I do. This is perfect time. I am about to publish a survey that I created, a survey instrument, And it is specifically for African American educators in the K-12 system because our voices are absent from a lot of the research that's being quoted out there. So I've built a survey instrument that targets African American teachers' perceptions on culturally relevant teaching. Because
great.
many times those initiatives and those programs are executed on campuses where we are the majority, because research has shown that a lot of the white educators are saying, well, we don't need it, we're teaching our own, it's not for us, when it's actually for everyone. So I want our voices to be present and accounted for in the research about how do we perceive, because these practices have been around for 30 years, they're not brand new. So I want to get their voice into the mix so that we know how to move forward and what's needed in our districts, in our schools, and on our campuses.
Thank you. So follow her on LinkedIn. You can find her by Katina Thomas on LinkedIn and do her survey. We need our voices heard. And that becomes a part of being a part of the union, being a part of great studies like Dr. Thompson is taking care of. So get out there, get your voice out there. And I hope that you come back next week. Next week we are going to have Dr. Goodwin from our history department at PVAMU come on, and he's going to talk about HBCUs must prepare to adjust to the new realities in a post-pandemic. Yes, we are trying to figure out where we're going after this pandemic, and we have to start preparing now. So tune in next week. That airs on March 22nd. Not next week. Next week is spring break. Enjoy your spring break, but you can watch this over and over again. So follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Bakita Pegram, or you can go straight to my website, Bakita Pegram, and always tune in to KPVU-TV, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Bakita out.